ever get that feeling, when the market's just all over the place? Up one minute, down the next. You're trying to figure out where of, if anywhere, it's going to find some sort of solid ground or hit a ceiling. I mean, where it just can't break through.
I think everyone who's ever looked at a chart has felt that way at some point, right?
Oh, absolutely. So how do you, as someone who's clearly on top of things and staying informed, navigate all that noise?
Well, for me,
to find those potential support and resistance levels, the ones that actually, hold.
yeah, it can be tough, honestly. And especially when things are moving so fast.
Mm-hmm.
It's in those moments of, real market turbulence that having, the right tools can be so helpful.
Oh, totally. Tools that give you more than just a rear view mirror kind of look at what's already happened, right?
Exactly. You need something to help you see where things might be headed, not just where they've been.
Which brings us to today's deep dive. We're going to focus on this really interesting indicator called peikIndicator.
Okay, peikIndicator, yeah.
I first came across it actually in a blog post that was breaking down how it was used in a live trading scenario.
Interesting. Live trading, so real-time application.
Yeah, exactly. But what really got my attention was where this indicator apparently came from. A website called technicalindicatorsThatSortOfWork.com.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's pretty upfront.
Right. You got to appreciate that level of honesty.
Absolutely. I mean, it kind of acknowledges that, technical analysis isn't always a sure thing, but at the same time, it hints that there might be something valuable there.
That's it, yeah. It piques your curiosity.
It definitely does.
So, okay, for everyone listening, our mission today is to unpack this whole peikIndicator thing. What is it really doing? What makes it tick differently?
Right.
And most importantly, what potential advantages does it offer?
Especially that forecasting aspect you mentioned. How can an indicator actually try to predict the future? That's the part that seems almost magical, right?
It does, yeah. It's like peering into a crystal ball. So let's start with the basics. What's the core idea behind peikIndicator? What's it actually built on?
Well, at its core, peikIndicator is this really clever combination, almost like a mashup, of two well-established indicators.
Okay, a mashup. I like that.
Yeah. You've got the relative strength index, which everyone knows is RSI.
Right, RSI. Pretty standard stuff.
Exactly. And then it combines that with something called a reverse RSI.
Reverse RSI. Okay, now that's new to me.
I hadn't heard of that one before either.
So just to level set for a second, for those who might need a refresher, walk us through RSI. What's it meant to do?
Sure. So RSI, it's a momentum indicator, right?
It's all about how strong the price moves are.
Exactly. And it tries to measure the speed and the magnitude of those price changes. Think of it as telling you if an asset has been, going up too quickly.
Too quickly being overbought.
Right. Or if it's been dropping too fast.
Oversold territory.
Exactly. And that can give you a heads up that a potential reversal might be coming.
So it's basically gauging if the recent price action is getting a bit stretched. Maybe too far in one direction.
Exactly. And that's where it can signal a potential turning point. But then you mentioned this reverse RSI. And the name itself kind of implies it's looking at things from the opposite angle, right?
Yeah. I mean, reverse, it's got to be looking at the flip side of RSI. So you've got these two different perspectives on momentum, each looking at it from a different side.
Working together, yeah.
So how does peikIndicator then blend these two perspectives to actually give us something forward-looking? How does it get to those forecasted support and resistance levels?
That's the really clever part. It somehow synthesizes the data from both the RSI and this reverse RSI to project those potential support and resistance levels out into the future.
It's not just looking at where those levels have been in the past based on old price data.
Right, exactly. It's trying to anticipate where they might form, based on the current dynamics of the market.
Based on how buying and selling pressure are playing out right now.
And that's reflected in those RSI components.
Okay, so it's instead of just identifying past turning points, it's trying to predict where the next ones might pop up.
Right. It's trying to peek around the corner, so to speak.
I like that. Now, the blog post we mentioned, they had a really great real-world example to show this in action. It was focused on the SPX, the S&P 500 index, back on March 26, 2025.
March 26, 2025. Okay. I vaguely remember that day. The market was a bit volatile, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. It opened with some definite downward pressure. The SPX started at 5780, and then boom, as the blog post said, rapid decline, lost something like 60 points really quickly.
So in those situations, everyone watching is wondering, okay, where's this thing going to stop? Where's the selling pressure going to ease up?
Right, exactly. And a lot of people, I'm sure, were looking at 5,700, that nice round psychological level.
Round numbers like that tend to attract attention.
People expect them to act as, like, magnets for the price.
They can become self-fulfilling prophecies almost. If enough traders believe a level will hold, their actions can actually make it hold.
But in this case, it didn't. The SPX just sliced straight through 5,700.
So much for psychological support.
Yeah, one of the traders in their group even said it was like 5,700 wasn't even a speed bump.
Ouch, that's gotta hurt if you were banking on that level holding.
Right. Relying on just that obvious level wouldn't have been very helpful. But this is where peikIndicator, with its analysis, steps in, right?
This is where it gets interesting. So what did peikIndicator show during this move?
Well, when they looked at it, it actually had flagged some potential support levels, but they were on different time frames.
Okay, different time frames. So not just a single prediction, but a more nuanced view.
Exactly. Specifically, on the 5-minute chart, peikIndicator had forecast support at 5703. It was represented as a dashed violet line on their charts.
Dashed violet line. So they visually differentiate these forecasted levels from the more traditional static ones.
Exactly. And the blog post mentioned that this 5703 level, it was actually tested a few times as the price was dropping.
Okay, so even though it didn't ultimately hold, it did create some reaction. Some buyers came in, at least temporarily.
Which suggests it was picking up on something, right? Like an area where there was a higher chance of a bounce.
It's fascinating how these tools can reveal these hidden pressure points in the market.
It is. Now, on the shorter time frame, the 1-minute chart, peikIndicator had forecast support even lower, down at 5696, and this is where it gets really interesting. The actual low that the SPX hit that day before buyers finally stepped in and the selling stopped was 5694.
5694, wow. That's incredibly close. Just 2 points off from the 1-minute forecast.
So while everyone was focused on that 5,700 level peikIndicator, by zeroing in on these shorter-term forecasts, it gave a much more accurate picture of where the bottom might actually be.
That's a powerful example of how looking at multiple time frames and considering these dynamically generated forecasts can give you a real advantage.
Absolutely. It's not just about where support or resistance has been historically, but where it might pop up next. Now, something else that's important to understand is this idea of stacked support or resistance levels.
Okay, stacked levels. Explain that one.
So when peikIndicator forecasts levels on multiple time frames, and they're all kind of close together, it doesn't mean that the earlier forecasts were wrong if they get broken.
Right, because price can often move in steps.
Exactly. Think of it as a series of potential zones where price might pause or bounce. If one level doesn't hold, it could just mean the move is continuing towards the next forecasted level.
It gives you a more layered, nuanced picture of potential support and resistance. It's like a waterfall.
Okay.
Hitting different ledges.
Yeah.
The water keeps falling until it finds a ledge that can hold it, even if the higher ledges overflowed.
I like that visual. That's a good one.
Now, you also mentioned these volatility bands that the blog post talked about. They can be displayed around those forecasted levels. What's the purpose of those?
The volatility bands are meant to give you an idea of how likely it is that a forecasted level will actually be relevant within the current trading day.
Because a support level way out there in the future might not be that helpful if you're trying to make a trade right now.
Right. So these bands, they expand and contract based on recent price volatility.
So if the market's been really choppy, the bands will be wider.
Exactly. And a general rule of thumb that they mentioned is if the volatility band doesn't even touch the current price, that forecasted level might be too far away to realistically be reached that day.
Okay, so it helps you filter out those forecasts that might not be actionable in the short term.
It adds this crucial element of time. It's not just about where the level might be, but also how likely it is to come into play soon.
It's adding that temporal dimension to the analysis. So to recap this whole SPX example, just relying on that 5,700 level, the obvious one, would have been misleading.
Because it didn't hold.
Right. But peikIndicator, by looking at shorter-term forecasts on the 5-minute and especially the 1-minute charts, it painted a much more accurate picture of where support might actually emerge.
That 1-minute forecast being just a couple of points off from the actual low is pretty amazing.
It really highlights the value of considering these dynamic forecasts, and this all comes back to peikIndicator's unique forecasting ability, which we discussed earlier.
Right. Most indicators, they just react. They show you what already happened.
They're looking in the rearview mirror.
But peikIndicator is trying to anticipate where things are going next.
It's looking ahead through the windshield.
It's like it's got this built-in crystal ball. So
Yeah.
for everyone out there who's always looking for an edge in the market, peikIndicator seems to offer something really different.
It's not just analyzing history, it's trying to predict the future.
And as that blog post playfully asked, what happened to the support at 5,700?
peikIndicator had an answer.
Yeah, it said, hey, The real support was actually a bit lower.
At least on that particular day.
Okay, so let's summarize this. The big takeaway is that what makes peikIndicator unique is its ability to forecast potential support and resistance levels. And we saw this play out in that SPX example.
Right. It pointed to levels that were ultimately more important than a widely watched psychological level.
And it does this by cleverly combining the traditional RSI with this reverse RSI, allowing it to analyze momentum from two angles and then project those potential price reaction zones into the future.
It's like having a two-pronged approach to reading the market's mind.
So here's a final thought to ponder. Could incorporating a forecasting element like this, the kind we see in peikIndicator, give you a new advantage in how you approach your analysis? I mean, even though all forecasting tools come with some level of uncertainty, how might knowing about potential future support and resistance levels, in addition to the historical ones, affect your trading or investing decisions? It's something to think about.